Before we begin, let me ask you something honestly. When the world goes quiet at night, when the notifications stop, when there's no one calling, no one asking where you are, does your chest feel heavy? Not because something bad happened, but because nothing happened at all. You scroll, you see people laughing, gathering, surrounded, and you wonder, why does my life look so empty compared to theirs? Why does it feel like everyone belongs somewhere, except me? Most people would call that loneliness. They'd tell you to fix it, to be louder, to be more social, to lower your standards just to avoid the silence. But the Stoics would ask a different question. What if this quiet is not a punishment? What if it's a signal? Because sometimes the absence of people is not a failure of your character, but a refusal of your soul. And today, we're going to explore a truth most people never confront. Why having few friends, or none at all, could be a sign of strength, discipline, and inner order. Not because you rejected the world, but because you refused to abandon yourself. Stay with me, because by the end of this reflection, you may realize that what you've been calling loneliness is actually the beginning of self-mastery. The Stoics believed something deeply unsettling to the modern mind. That comfort is not the goal of life. Clarity is, and clarity often arrives only when the noise disappears. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor surrounded by power, crowds, and praise, wrote much of his wisdom alone, not in palaces filled with conversation, but in silence between battles within his own thoughts. He understood something most people never learn, that being surrounded does not mean being supported, and being alone does not mean being lost. In fact, the Stoics warned that constant company often weakens the mind, not because people are bad, but because most people are not intentional. They drift, they distract, they consume time without adding meaning. And when your inner life begins to deepen, when your values sharpen, when you stop chasing validation and start seeking truth, your circle naturally becomes smaller, not out of arrogance, out of alignment. Let's be honest. Shallow connection is easy. You can bond over jokes, gossip, habits, routines. You can sit with people for hours and say nothing real. You can laugh without ever being known. But depth demands something uncomfortable. Presence, attention, integrity. And when you begin to value those things, many relationships quietly fall away. Not because you push people out, but because you stop pretending. Epictetus taught that freedom begins the moment you stop needing others to approve of you. And that moment is terrifying for most people, because approval is currency. It buys belonging. It buys safety. It buys distraction from a self. When you no longer trade your values for company, the crowd thins quickly, but what remains is real. Here is the first insight the Stoics understood clearly. Depth isolates before it connects. When your mind begins asking deeper questions about purpose, discipline, mortality, responsibility, you will find fewer people willing to meet you there. Not everyone wants to reflect. Not everyone wants to grow. Not everyone wants to sit with uncomfortable truths. Most people want relief, not refinement. So when your conversations feel misaligned, when small talk drains you, when you'd rather be alone than pretend, that's not dysfunction. That's discernment. The Stoics believe the soul is shaped by what it consumes. If you constantly surround yourself with distraction, your inner life becomes fragmented. But if you choose fewer voices, your thoughts become clearer. Silence is not empty. It is selective. The second insight is one modern society resists the most. Solitude is not loneliness. It is training. Most people fear being alone because solitude removes all anesthesia. There's no one to impress, no one to distract you, no one to absorb your discomfort. You are left with your thoughts, your habits, your fears. And that's exactly why solitude is powerful. The Stoics didn't seek isolation to escape life. They used it to prepare for it. In quiet moments, you notice your impulses, your reactions, your emotional patterns. You see where you lack control, where desire rules you, where fear dictates your choices. And only what is seen can be strengthened. A person who cannot sit alone without anxiety will cling to anything. People, noise, chaos, just to avoid themselves. But a person who can remain steady in silence has already won half the battle of life, because their peace is internal, not borrowed. Ask yourself this honestly. If everyone disappeared tomorrow, would you still feel whole? Or would you feel erased? The Stoics believe the strongest person is the one who does not collapse when external things are removed. Solitude teaches that strength. It builds independence of mind, stability of emotion, clarity of direction. It is not punishment. It is preparation. The third insight is simple but difficult to accept. Not all connection is nourishment. More people does not mean more meaning. You could be surrounded and still feel unseen. You could be admired and still feel hollow. You could be included and still feel alone. Seneca warned that associating with the wrong people slowly reshapes your values, often without you noticing. You begin to tolerate what you once rejected. You laugh at what once disturbed you. You normalize what once felt wrong. This is how character erodes. Quietly, when your circle becomes smaller, it is often because your standards became stronger. You no longer exchange energy for proximity. You no longer maintain bonds that require self-betrayal. And yes, this can feel empty at first, but emptiness is not always loss. Sometimes it's space. Space for growth. Space for focus. Space for becoming someone you respect. A single honest connection is worth more than a room full of performance. Now here is a truth that requires patience. The right people do not arrive on demand. We live in a world obsessed with immediacy. Fast friendships, instant boulangerie, quick validation. But the Stoics understood timing. Just as nature moves in seasons, so does connection. There are periods meant for gathering and periods meant for refinement. If you are in a season of solitude, it does not mean you are forgotten. It means you are being shaped. Your values are solidifying. Your boundaries are strengthening. Your identity is becoming less negotiable. And when you reach that point, the wrong people no longer recognize you, but the right ones do. Authenticity acts like a signal, but only those tuned to the same frequency can receive it. That's why forcing connection never works. It attracts noise, not harmony. The Stoics taught that you cannot control who enters your life, but you can control who stays. And more importantly, you can control who you become. So what does having few friends actually say about you? It says you don't confuse attention with worth. It says you value peace over performance. It says you refuse to dilute yourself just to avoid silence. It says you'd rather walk alone with integrity than blend into a crowd without direction. This is not weakness. It is restraint, and restraint is power. Most people are never alone long enough to discover who they are. You are, and that is rare. There will be moments when the quiet hurts, when you question yourself, when doubt whispers that something is wrong with you. In those moments, remember this. The same solitude that feels heavy today is forging resilience you will rely on tomorrow. Use this time wisely. Strengthen your body, because discipline grounds a mind. Strengthen your mind, because clarity protects your peace. Strengthen your spirit, because purpose outlasts companionship. Do not rush this phase. When the right people arrive, they will not fill a void. They will walk beside someone already complete. They will not demand you become smaller. They will recognize your depth, because they carry their own. Those connections, slow, deliberate, honest, are worth the wait. So if your life feels quieter than most, don't assume it's empty. Listen more closely. You may discover that the silence is not absence. It is alignment. And that is something the crowd will never understand. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to support the channel by subscribing to Stoic Spring. This is a place for those who value inner strength over noise. Like the video, so others who need this reminder can find it. And in the comments, write, I choose depth over noise. It tells me you stayed until the end, and that you're walking this path consciously. Choose one more video on your screen, not for entertainment, but for refinement. Because the strongest lives are built quietly.